Chapter 3. First Moves. Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment after leaving his mum's room, letting the situation settle into something he could work with. Not emotionally. That could wait. Practically, power was out. Mobile signal was down. Something had altered the world outside in a way he did not understand, but understood well enough to know it was real. His mum's backup oxygen cylinder was buying time, not solving the problem. The creature on the street had not been an isolated event. The voice had not been a one-off trick of stress or lack of sleep. The text floating in front of his eyes had not disappeared when ignored. He needed supplies. He needed information. He needed to stop thinking in terms of what should be happening and start dealing with what was. When he stepped back into the kitchen, Lewis looked up from the window straight away. "Well?" Lewis asked. Daniel shut the bedroom door most of the way behind him before answering. "She's all right for now." "For now," Lewis repeated. Yeah, that phrase was going to do a lot of work, Daniel thought, probably more than either of them liked. Lewis nodded once, reading the tone rather than the words. "So we move." Daniel picked up the notepad from the counter and read over what he had written. System details. Basic stats. Creature on the street. Unconscious people. Voice heard globally, or close enough to it. He added another line beneath the rest. Oxygen limited. Priority remains medical supply. He put the pen down. Lewis glanced at the page. "You really are writing all of it down, yes? You think it'll matter?" "I think there's too much happening too quickly," Daniel said. "People miss details when they panic, and you don't—" Daniel looked at him. "Of course I do." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "I just try not to miss the important ones," that got a brief, humorless smile from Lewis. "Fair?" Daniel set the notepad aside and moved to the main kitchen drawer where he kept the things that became useful, often enough to deserve a place. Over time the contents had changed, but the logic behind it never had. Anything that solved problems without needing to be searched for could stay. He took out a torch, checked it, then unscrewed the back just enough to make sure the batteries were seated properly before tightening it again. Spare batteries went next. Then a small multi-tool, a roll of tape, a pair of work gloves. He laid them out on the counter, checked each one without thinking too hard about it, then opened the backpack hanging off the back of a chair and packed them in. Lewis watched in silence for a moment, before saying, "You've definitely imagined bad scenarios before." "I've imagined systems failing," Daniel said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Lewis admitted. "Probably not." Daniel zipped the bag halfway, then paused. His eyes shifted to the smaller drawer near the fridge, the one that collected the things that did not fit anywhere else. He opened it and moved aside a few old receipts, some loose coins, a tire pressure gauge, and a half-used packet of painkillers until he found the folding utility knife. He checked the hinge and lock out of habit, folded it shut again, and clipped it into his pocket. Lewis gave a small nod. "That makes sense, maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe it makes me feel slightly less stupid. Could be both." Daniel closed the drawer and looked around the kitchen once more. Water bottles by the sink. Carrier bags under the side table. Keys on the counter. Phone in his pocket. Nothing else stood out as immediately necessary. He was aware, quietly and without much comfort, that this was how he always reacted when things went wrong. He broke them down into tasks, reduced them into smaller problems, worked through them one by one, until the larger thing felt less like a wall and more like a series of doors that needed opening. It did not make him brave. It just kept panic from being useful. The system flickered faintly at the edge of his vision again. Unassigned points, 5. Action available. Assign attributes. He stared at the lines for a second, then looked away. Not now. Not while he still had no idea what assigning would actually do. Lewis shifted beside him. "You seeing more of it?" "Yeah, same as before. Mostly." "Still wants me to spend points." Lewis rubbed his jaw. "Mine too." Daniel looked at him properly. "Don't—" Lewis let out a breath that might have been a laugh in less impossible circumstances. "I wasn't planning to— Good. You really think it could go that badly?" "I think blindly interacting with something forced into your head by a voice no one can explain is a bad habit to start." Lewis considered that for about a second. "When you put it like that, yeah." Daniel picked up the bag. "I'm going to speak to my mum again. Then we go—" Lewis nodded and stepped away from the window. I'll be here." When Daniel went back into the bedroom, his mum was already awake and watching the door, as if she had measured the length of his conversation by the silence around it. The portable oxygen cylinder hissed quietly beside the bed. "You're still here," she said. "Wasn't gone that long, felt longer." Daniel checked the pressure gauge again. It was dropping steadily, but not yet at a rate that made his stomach turn over. Not yet. "Lewis is taking me to the chemist," he said. "Then maybe the corner shop, depending on what it looks like." She nodded once. "Good. I'll keep it short." She watched him for another second. "You're already trying to decide what counts as a necessary risk." He looked up from the cylinder. "Probably. Don't make yourself impossible to argue with before you've even left the house." That almost made him smile. Almost. "I'm not planning to. That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She shifted slightly against the pillows, then stopped when the effort made itself known. Daniel adjusted the blanket lower down without being asked. "When your father got ill," she said quietly, "you started trying to fix everything before anyone asked you to. You were 10. Daniel did not say anything. "You still do it. I know. That's not a criticism." "It sounds like one." "It's not," she said again. "It just means you'll need to remember there are limits now as well." He held her gaze for a second. "I do know that. Knowing it and acting like you know it are different things." That was annoyingly true, which was probably why he didn't answer straight away. She softened slightly. "I'm not telling you not to go, I know. I'm telling you not to forget that if the world's gone mad, you won't fix all of it before lunch." That time the smile actually made it onto his face, brief and tired though it was. "I'll aim lower then." "Good." He checked the cylinder one last time, then straightened. "I'll be back as quickly as I can. Take Lewis seriously if he tells you something's a bad idea." Daniel looked at her. She gave him the smallest shrug. "You're less likely to listen to yourself." He could not really argue with that either. When he went back into the kitchen, Lewis had moved away from the window and was standing by the front door, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly tight. He looked like a man trying not to pace. "She all right?" he asked. "As much as she can be." Lewis nodded. Daniel slung the backpack properly over one shoulder and checked for his keys by touch rather than sight. "Let's go." At the front door, he paused with his hand on the handle and listened first. No immediate shouting, no pounding footsteps, no impact sounds nearby, just a distant sense of motion in the world beyond the walls of the house. Something broken, something waiting. He unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The street looked much the same as it had 10 minutes earlier, which only made it feel more wrong. Too much had changed for anything to still appear familiar. Front gardens, brick facades, parked cars, wet pavement, all of it intact, but all of it under a tension that had not been there yesterday. There were fewer people outside now. Those who had stayed out during the first shock had mostly gone indoors. Curtains shifted. One upstairs window had been opened slightly, then closed again when Daniel glanced towards it. The abandoned hatchback further down the street still sat at an angle where it had been left. They stepped outside and closed the door behind them. Daniel checked the lock automatically. Lewis noticed. "You'd do that in the apocalypse." "I'd do it on the moon if there was a door." That's reassuring in a strange way. They started down the street towards the van. Daniel kept his pace steady and his attention moving. He checked the gaps between parked cars, the open side gate 2 houses down, the shallow recess of a porch across the road. He tried not to make the scanning obvious, but he was well past caring whether anyone thought he looked paranoid. At number 19, the front door opened a fraction. "Daniel?" He turned. Mrs. Harris stood there in a cardigan thrown over her dressing gown, one hand still on the latch as if she was ready to shut the door at the first sign of bad news. Which, Daniel thought, was sensible. "You all right?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "Nothing works. My phone's dead, the television's gone, and I heard something." Daniel took a second before replying, partly to choose his words and partly because false reassurance would only waste time. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock the door. Don't go wandering about." Her face tightened. "Is it some kind of attack?" "I don't know what it is yet," he said, but outside is worse than inside right now. She looked past him at Lewis and then back again. Should I ring my daughter? If your phone comes back, yes. Until then, keep your door locked and stay put. Do you have water in? Yes. Food? Yes. Good. She hesitated, clearly wanting more than that, but there was nothing useful he could give her. In the end, she nodded and shut the door again. Lewis waited until they had walked on a bit before speaking. You're going to end up doing that with half the street? No, Daniel said. Lewis glanced at him. You know what I mean? Daniel did. He just didn't want to say it out loud. At the van, he did a full check before either of them got in, underneath, through the side windows, behind the rear doors, nothing obvious, no movement nearby. Looks clear, he said. Lewis unlocked it but didn't open the door yet. You want to just get in and go? Daniel looked down the road, then back at the van. Start it first, then step back a few seconds. Lewis frowned. To see if something reacts to the noise. Yeah, that seems sensible, Lewis said, which told Daniel just how far the morning had already twisted away from normal. Lewis got in, turned the key, and the engine started on the second beat. Daniel listened, eyes on the street, on the rooftops, on the mouth of the side road at the far end. Nothing happened. Lewis switched the engine off again and got back out. They moved a few steps away and waited. 10 seconds, nothing. 20. A curtain shifted on the opposite side of the road. Still nothing. Daniel gave a small nod. All right, Lewis reopened the driver's door. Deeply reassuring in a not reassuring way, yeah, this time they both got in and Lewis started the van for real. The engine rumbled into life. Daniel watched the mirrors while Lewis slowly from the curb. The short drive towards the local shops felt longer than it should have. Streets that ought to have had traffic were empty or half abandoned. A transit van had been left skewed across a mini roundabout as if the driver had simply stopped and walked away. A bicycle lay on its side outside the post office, front wheels still lazily turning in the rainwater. At one bus stop, a woman sat on the bench with both hands flat on her knees, staring straight ahead. Daniel could not tell whether she was in shock, unconscious with her eyes open, or simply refusing to move until the world made sense again. Lewis noticed her too. Do we stop? Daniel looked back through the passenger window as they passed. No. Lewis was quiet for a moment. Right, it was the right decision, and it still felt wrong. At the parade of shops, the chemist stood 3 units down from the corner. Its shutter was halfway down, the glass behind it still intact. The convenience shop beside it looked similar, though one side of its shutter hung slightly crooked. No movement stood out immediately. Where do you want me? Lewis asked. Just short of it. Not directly in front. Lewis eased the van forward and stopped where the chemist was still in easy reach, but the vehicle was not the first thing anyone would see coming out. Engine off, Daniel said. Lewis did it without comment. They got out and approached on foot, both instinctively quieter now than they had been when leaving the house. The open street felt exposed. Every reflective surface looked like something watching. Daniel crouched by the chemist's shutter and tested it carefully. It moved a little, not fully locked. Give me a hand, he said. Together they lifted it just enough to duck under. The metal scraped faintly against the runners and both men stopped dead, listening. No immediate reaction. They slipped inside and let the shutter settle back to its previous height. The interior was stale and close. Shelves were still stocked. Nothing had been properly looted yet, which meant either nobody had thought that far ahead or nobody had wanted to risk being first. Daniel went straight for the respiratory supplies. Portable oxygen canisters, not as large as he would have liked, but better than nothing. He checked the gauge on the first one, pressure good enough. He took it, then another, plus spare masks and tubing that looked compatible with what his mum already used. After that he grabbed painkillers, antiseptic wipes, bandages, and anything else small enough to carry and useful enough to matter. Lewis was already at the back gathering bottled water, batteries, and packets of long-life food from the convenience section. Daniel kept working until the pale system text flickered in front of his eyes again. Unassigned points, 5. Action available. Assign attributes, he ignored it. Not here. Not while his hands were occupied and his head was split in 6 directions already. You seeing that again? Lewis asked quietly from the next aisle. Yeah. What if spending them would actually help? Daniel straightened slowly, one canister in hand. What if it doesn't? Lewis made a face. I preferred games when the stakes were lower. Same? A faint scrape sounded outside the shutter. Both men stopped moving. Another scrape, then footsteps, careful ones. Daniel shifted to the edge of the aisle where he could see the front without putting himself fully on show. A shadow moved across the lower section of the shutter. "Anyone in there?" a voice called. Male. Adult. Tense. Daniel stayed quiet for a second, judging. The voice came again, sharper this time. "I heard you." Daniel stepped just far enough to be seen through the gap below the shutter. Outside stood a man in a dark waterproof jacket with a younger woman just behind him. Both looked exhausted already. Neither looked eager for a fight. "We're just taking medical supplies," Daniel said. The man looked past him into the shop. "So are we." Daniel glanced once at the shelf. There was still stock there, not endless, but enough that refusing them would create a problem for no gain. "We'll be out in a minute," he said. "There's still stuff left." The younger woman spoke from behind the man. "We need inhalers." Daniel gave a small nod. "Then wait 20 seconds and come in." They looked at each other, uncertain but desperate enough to accept it. Lewis came up beside him with his bag half full. "You sure about that?" "There's no point starting something here if we don't need to." Lewis looked at the pair outside, then back at Daniel. "Can't argue." Daniel took one inhaler from the respiratory shelf and kept it in hand while they finished packing. On the way out, he passed it through the gap to the woman. Her expression was startled enough to make him think she had expected a refusal. "Thanks," she said quickly. He just nodded and kept moving. Back outside, the street seemed even quieter than before, and Daniel was beginning to understand how dangerous that might be. They walked back towards the van at a controlled pace, not quite rushing, but no longer pretending there was time to spare. Halfway there, something moved in a driveway on their right. Daniel saw it first and slowed instantly. Lewis matched him a second later. A fox stood half in shadow, half in the open, or something that had once been a fox. It was too large, its body held too still, its eyes reflecting an odd pale sheen even in daylight. It watched them with a focus that no normal animal would have bothered wasting on two passing humans. "Don't look at it too much," Daniel said quietly. Lewis stared straight ahead. "Wasn't planning to." They adjusted their path slightly to give the driveway wider space and kept walking. The fox thing did not move. It simply watched them pass. Only when they were at the van did Lewis let out a breath. "I liked foxes better when they just went through bins, yeah." They got in. This time there was no waiting after the engine started. Lewis pulled away at once, and Daniel watched the mirrors until the chemist disappeared from view. On the drive back, the town seemed to be withdrawing into itself, more doors shut, more movement behind curtains. No police, no ambulances, no sign of any official response at all. That bothered Daniel more than chaos would have. Chaos could be understood. Silence from every system people were meant to trust was harder to read. Lewis tapped the steering wheel lightly. "You think this is happening everywhere?" Daniel looked out at the empty road ahead. Probably that's a horrible answer. It's still probably true when they reached the house. Daniel was out of the van almost before it had fully settled. He grabbed the bag and headed straight for the door while Lewis came in behind him carrying the second load. Inside, the air felt different again. Not safe exactly, but bounded. Manageable. He went straight to the bedroom and set the medical supplies down beside the bed. His mum looked at the canisters first, then at him. "You found some?" "Yes." He swapped the fuller cylinder into place. Checked the pressure, checked the line, checked the connection twice, then set the remaining supplies within easy reach. Masks, tubing, painkillers, spare canister, better, still temporary, but better. His mum watched him for a moment. That was quick. It needed to be. She looked at the supplies again, then gave a small nod. "Good." Daniel stood back at last and let out a slow breath. For the first time since waking, he had done something that directly improved their position, rather than simply reacting to collapse. It wasn't enough to feel relief, but it was enough to feel less helpless, and that mattered more than he liked to admit. Back in the kitchen, Lewis leaned against the counter and looked at the notepad. "So," he said, "what now?" Daniel set the second bag down, unzipped it, and looked over the contents. Water, batteries, food, some basic supplies. Not enough, not close to enough, but a start. Then he looked at the pale flicker at the edge of his vision, then at the front door. Then at the notes he had written in plain ink on plain paper, because impossible things still felt easier to trust when they were written down. "We find out what this actually is," he said at last. Lewis looked around the kitchen as if expecting the answer to be somewhere between the kettle and the fruit bowl. And how exactly do we do that? Daniel thought of the unconscious people on the street, the changed animals, the floating text, the voice that had spoken, as if humanity were a machine being upgraded whether it wanted to be or not. "One careful step at a time," he said. Outside, the world was still changing. Inside, for the next few minutes at least, they had enough oxygen, enough water, enough quiet, and just enough control to begin deciding what came next. It would have to do